I've known Tom Wolfe since the very beginning of my career. Irwin Winkler and myself, in fact, had Tom write the first screenplay for us, ever.
Tom was somebody who, when I'd be in New York, I'd have lunch with him or dinner with he and his wife and my wife. So we were social friends. And he told me he was writing the right stuff. And when he finished the book, we got the galleys very, very early from his agent. We read it and thought it was really the good possibility of a movie were right there in those galleys.
Irwin and Bob treated the project very seriously, and they were determined to get as much of my book into the film as they could.
We were successful in our negotiations, bought it, sold it to United Artists, who agreed to finance the screenplay. So we thought the best way to approach it then was to get a writer-director. And somehow we saw a film called White Dawn that Phil Kaufman directed. And I thought anybody that was mad enough to go up to Iceland or the Antarctic, wherever they shot White Dawn, and live in an iceberg for any amount of time had the right stuff.
There was no question in my mind. I knew Phil's work, knew him as a person as well as an artist, and was eager to have him aboard.
I think I wrote my first draft in about 8 weeks. And I just sort of wrote day and night, went through the book. And I really tried to incorporate as much as I could of the kind of rambunctious Tom Wolfe prose into the dialogue, actually.
The script took about a year to develop altogether. It was a long process. Not that that's particularly unusual, but it was a tough one for all of us until we finally got a script that we all liked.
We then turned that screenplay over to United Artists, and they said they didn't want to make that. We then gave it to the Ladd Company.
The Ladd Company was thinking of picking it up, and they just wanted to know exactly what the story was. So we storyboarded virtually the entire movie. It took quite a while to do that, and then we went down and put up, the panels all over the room, and I went around and told the entire story of the movie.
And they moved very quickly and said they wanted to make it. And we found the home for it and then started preparing the film.
We had no choice but to hire unknown actors. Not that we would have done otherwise anyway, but we didn't have all that much money.
We did have images of what these men looked like, so we were able to cast the astronauts accordingly, and it wasn't that hard. The real challenge was the Sam Shepard role.
Was looking everywhere for somebody who had the Yeager-esque quality. Chuck is, tough, very energetic guy. Sam is tall, and has a Gary Cooper quality.
I wasn't sure about Sam for the part, and Phil was totally committed to using Sam. And my concern was he hadn't done much acting. And in the draft that we had at that time, the character had a lot to say and do. And finally, one day when I was sitting with Phil and telling him about my reservation, he said, "Bob, I think I have a solution." And he went back, and a day or two later, he came back with a script where he exercised much of Sam's dialogue and added much of the dimension of his physicality. And in fact, it turned out to improve the character a great deal, made me happy, and all of us. And of course, Sam's performance is incredible.
When I read the book, I said, if they ever make a movie about this, I'd love to play Gordo Cooper. Cut to a year and a half later, they're making a movie of it, Ken Wall, I think, was written for him, Gordo Cooper was. But for some reason, Ken wound up not doing it. And so the process sort of started over again. And I went back in to see Phil, and it was on the same day that I was also auditioning for Francis Ford Coppola on The Outsiders. And I went in to see Phil and did a screen test, and I got the part for him right then and there. So I had to turn down Francis.
I knew this was going to be an important film. And just because it was Phil Kaufman and because of the material and the people that were becoming involved, and it felt really good.
Fred was wonderful to work with because he embodied a kind of male quality that is, in a way, hard to come by in our times.
I think the most thrilling moment was when Ed Harris walked into the room. Phil and I were casting that day. We had seen maybe 20 different actors. And Ed Harris came in, and Phil and I looked at each other, and we couldn't believe that this was John Glenn incarnate, walking into our lives.
The second time when we were going in to read, I remember being disappointed, and I wouldn't feel very good about what I did, and I was leaving down the hallway and banged the wall or something because I was a little upset, and I guess Phil saw that through the door and thought, well, at least the guy's got some energy, So it was a very exciting time, I had made a couple movies at that point, but nothing like that, nothing like The Right Stuff.
Everybody in Los Angeles, I think, was auditioning. It was crowded. Philip Kaufman, Bob Chardoff producing, Irwin Winkler, who wouldn't want to be involved in that? It was really a great day, when they came to me and told me I got in.
Pamela, I thought the character she played was just wonderful. The long-suffering woman who, eventually, did leave. Veronica Cartwright, is one of my favorite actresses. I've often said to Veronica, I don't know how I can make a movie without you.
I think I auditioned a couple of times. Phil told me later that he had written the part with me in mind, which was great. And, but of course that had nothing, he didn't tell me that, otherwise I would have maybe gone in a little overconfident.
Harry Shearer and Jeff Goldblum, they were great. I mean, all their little things of getting the wrong jacket, they're just great to have around a set. And, they inspire me with their humor.
Phil, his spirit was, let's make something good and let's enjoy ourselves while we're doing it. We were making, for good and sufficient reason, a totally different movie than everybody else.
It's, again, interesting what Phil did. There were like 3 styles of film there. There's kind of the Western romantic thing going on, and then the hotshot pilots, and then this crazy press troupe.
The Bologna brothers were hired to be the monster known as the press.
I met this Commedia dell'arte troupe. Just the way they had of moving, almost like a clown act. They were great.
The Bologna brothers, for my money, were among the best actors in the movie.
The logistics of a picture of this nature were really, really horrendous. What did save us was that we had basically 2 principal locations, Edwards Air Force Base, which we shot a lot of the stuff, and then out up in San Francisco, and we had that as a home base.
It's hard to believe that most of that film was shot in San Francisco to portray all Florida, Texas, Washington, all kinds of places.
A lot of the stuff where we recreated things, we really studied the footage really carefully because there was really good 35mm footage of the parade of John Glenn going through New York, and we had to try to figure out a street that would match the sunlight from the real footage that existed.
We went up to San Francisco on a bank holiday, Memorial Day or something, when a street was closed, and we were able to simulate the ticker tape parade.
I just remember being in the car with Annie and Lyndon and waving to the crowd, and having a good time.
Production designers had a big job to do to recreate the authenticity of the NASA program. We had to build a capsule that was going to go into the ocean. I remember the first time we tested it, it worked fine. We then got out on the seashore, dropped it off a helicopter, and it sunk.
We were in Half Moon Bay, south of San Francisco. Coolish water. But I had a wetsuit on underneath and then the flight suit.
After we filmed there, we found out that there were great white sharks in the water, too. So, fortunately, we didn't know about it at the time.
Part of the concept of shooting during the production had to do with giving the guys a place like Poncho's. It just so happened that one of my best friends, Jeanette Etheridge, owns one of the great bars in the world called Tosca.
So he used to take all of the boys down there, and they'd go play pool in the back.
And this became the hangout for everybody in the movie, really. They used to sit at the piano over here and play, and you know,
Sam
Dennis
would play the piano and Dennis would sing.
It was good to hang out and every night with these actors and actresses.
Even though it was off hours, the guys would come here and basically still be in their characters.
I mean, it was really interesting on the film because everybody, I mean, all the guys who played astronauts really got into their parts. And I remember, I think Dennis and Scott Glenn both went out and bought Corvettes. And, you know, they really got into the spirit of it.
First thing I did is I called up Gordo Cooper, and I went over to his house and sat down with him, and he just, you know, put it all out, his whole career and his life, and, you know, his feelings about the space program. I also decided to take flying lessons. I felt it was really important because all the astronauts were pilots, and that was a big thing about being a pilot, you know, and I felt it was important to really get inside their heads and their souls by doing that.
I read what I could, and Phil did give us these packets of information, and I just so happened to have been in the Air Force prior to that, so there was a familiarity to me.
I immersed myself in the space program. I mean, they had, you know, we had access to a lot of the NASA documents and things.
Right here, tape is go and I am go.
They had tapes of Glenn's voice that I could listen to. So any little thing like that that's helpful in terms of interpreting for yourself the guy.
I think we shot 72 days in San Francisco, and when we went down to Edwards, we were, I think, 1 day behind schedule, which wasn't bad considering we'd already done, we'd done so many of the big scenes. When we came down there, we encountered a number of problems.
The first day I joined them, I remember walking onto the set, and they had this burly, he looked like a Hell's Angel first assistant director, who sat down on the runway in front of me and keeled over in a faint. I thought, oh my God.
The inconvenience that I remember best was the dust.
They have 50-mile-an-hour winds at Edwards 11 months out of the year, and sand and dirt is in every orifice.
At times we had to wear masks when we weren't actually on camera to just keep down the amount of dust that we were breathing hour after hour on that location. And I'm thinking primarily of the ponchos location.
We built ponchos as accurately as we could.
There wasn't anything left of the old Ponchos Ranch because it burned down. There was a chimney and a swimming pool and 1 or 2 walls, and that's all that was left. And so they had to rent this ranch over by Mojave and sort of duplicate it as much as they could to make it like Ponchos, like the bar and the swinging screen door and the piano.
Having Chuck Yeager as our consultant was a total inspiration for everybody.
I think meeting Chuck Yeager was one of the high points of making the film for me.
It was, you know, a little bit intimidating, actually, to be around him, you know. This is the guy who broke the sound barrier.
He was on the set every day of the shoot, so it was basically like having a John Wayne, you know, on the set with you all the time.
The one thing that I did initially was take all of the 7 astronauts and Sam up in a Bonanza or an airplane, show them Edwards in the dry lake bed, and fly around a little bit and get them oriented towards flying. And it worked out pretty good.
There was a sequence that we needed to get of Dennis Quaid flying a jet plane. And the only way to get it was to have a 2-seater plane and set up a camera.
I was asked to turn the camera on, you know, to shoot me in the cockpit.
And then just before he left, Phil whispers to the pilot, who happened to be a test pilot for Lockheed, he said, give him a really good, flight, meaning make it really exciting.
When I was taking like 8, 9 Gs.
So the next day we go and we look at the footage, and, it comes up on the screen, and there's Dennis sitting there, and he's got the camera on, you see him turn the Nagra on, he's all ready to go, and then you start to see the light going around, and you see Dennis sort of looking around like this.
I got violently ill on this trip. All you see is me turning green and then just going.
We wanted that pristine desert landscape, and we had left notes for the crew and everything. You know, don't put tire marks on this. And of course, there we were coming up just as the car was just about to drive, you know, carelessly over that. And Caleb just jumped out of a car, went running over, jumped on the hood of this car and just started beating it with his fists. You know, that's what you want from your cinematographer, somebody who risks his life for the look of the movie.
Caleb is a great artist. He was very demanding and only really wanted to shoot sunrise and sunset, anything when we were doing exteriors.
This was a really big deal to work with someone like Caleb Deschanel. You know, I mean, sometimes we'd have to wait 6-8 hours for the lighting to be finished, but it was worth the wait. It was some of the most extraordinary work I'd ever seen, and to this day have seen.
We sort of tried to capture this sort of sense of place and time, and I think a lot of the way the film looks really came from observations we made in location scouting.
Our production offices, there was a long corridor outside. Suddenly one day I said, Caleb, let's get all the guys in silver suits, the way the light's streaming through here, and let's just have them walk towards us. I think it's going to be a great shot.
That honestly was inspired by the fact that we were in that building all the time. And I remember, you know, looking at the hallway, and there was a certain time of day when the sun would come in there, and, you know, you would see people walking through, and we saw that shot a dozen times, but without the astronauts.
I just remember doing it. You know, we're all suited up. You know, Caleb's doing this incredible lighting thing. It's this kind of long shot, strolling down there. And you felt, he's kind of like, would be like, you know, walking out for the Super Bowl or something with your team.
Even though it was difficult, tough, full of problems and probably battles, but in my mind, you know, the sun is shining.
Major challenge on this picture was doing the special effects. This was before computers were even known. No one had heard of CGI at that point. And how we were going to manage to get the shots that we needed was almost conjecture. Phil, who was living in San Francisco, knew of Gary Gutierrez.
I think that Phil saw in me and my sort of fledgling company. I think he sort of identified with us as young filmmakers who weren't necessarily predisposed to specific classical ways of doing things. I guess in every project there's a sort of an evolution you go through, and you have your theories to begin with, and then you have your experiments that you do that prove most of those theories wrong.
The early stuff that they started to do was all this motion control stuff, and it was very, very pristine and perfect and everything.
I was just so unhappy with the, you know, the kind of look and feel of that. My feeling was it works on outer space, on other planets, but it doesn't work well on this Earth.
The thing that Phil really wanted to do was really create a visceral sense of what it was like.
And it sort of came to a crux at some point when Phil asked me to come down his location in the Mojave Desert.
And I said, look, we've got to really start all over with the effects.
He managed to express his displeasure with sort of the way things were going, but also to give me enough encouragement to suggest that I should trust my own instincts and be willing to try some crazy things and see what I could come up with.
We basically, you know, went and got together with Gary, and we started doing things with the visual effects that basically amounted to, you know, throwing model airplanes off of buildings.
It was sort of like 19th century science. It was like if we could make it out of surgical tubing and wire and do stuff with helium balloons, we could sort of do anything. It was a beautiful shot where the F-104 is supposed to be flying straight up, just we attached helium balloon, attached a 30, 40-foot wire tether to it, and at the bottom of that was the F-104 model attached to that. So we just released the balloon, and it would take the plane up with it on this long wire trailing below, and we just framed the balloon out. So all you could see was this plane going straight up in the air, and it would twist a little bit and catch a nice glint of light, and you see that shot in the movie.
And then combining that with the works of Jordan Belson, who was one of the 60s icons of experimental film, who created a lot of the outer space effects, the heavens sort of opening up, or, the fireflies around John Glenn.
All the images that are there are really unique and full of impact, and I was just sort of in awe of the effects he was creating, and I have no idea how he created them. We pumped him for information, but he wouldn't give.
We had about 120 people doing special effects, creating sort of elaborate sound effects, and editing all the documentary footage and so forth.
I think the first time I really caught on to what was happening was going into one of the editor's rooms where he was cutting up some of our footage. And when you see the flying sequences and the right stuff, you see that screen direction is thrown out the window. It was all edited with, for a kind of a kinetic energy. Seeing that footage was quite a rush, and I think it energized all of us when we started to see what it was going to look like.
We knew we had a good film, but we also knew we had a very long film. At one point, it was 5 hours long. So we went through that process of cutting it down.
The editing just took a long time.
And now the post-production period was getting squeezed, and we had to find a composer real quick. And we decided on Bill Conti.
Well, normally, you arrive and you do view. In most cases, you view a rough cut. But I think I was viewing a fine cut, which is the last cut, because they were really late, instead of one of those procedures that take you from the script through musings about what the score could be, what would you like to do, try this, try that. It was really, let's do this now and get it over with. So I did.
Bill then wrote this great score, which I think, is right up there with, Dvorak's New World Symphony. I mean, it's just that kind of groundbreaking score, and won an Academy Award for Best Score for it.
The Ladd Company, who were great supporters of the film, had gotten an opportunity to do a premiere of the film in Washington, D.C.
It was the best premiere I think I have ever been to in my entire life. We went to Washington, D.C. They showed it, screened it in the Kennedy Center.
A lot of dignitaries, red carpet, cross sabers.
Lots of people seem to think that this was an amazing start for the film.
But it was not a success. It was just supposed to be the biggest success there ever was. And it was the same year that John Glenn was running for president.
They had a big picture. I remember that picture covering me on Newsweek. Can a movie make a president? Which sent a weird signal. It was like, what is this film about? Is this like some, pro-John Glenn campaign movie or something? It had nothing to do with it.
As I recall, Irwin and Bob at the studio had a poll taken in which they approached people in line to the Big Chill, which was another film out at that time, and say, why is it you're going to the Big Chill instead of The Right Stuff? And the invariable answer was, oh, we're going to go see The Right Stuff because we know how important it is for understanding this election. But tonight we just want to kick back and have a good time. So it turned out to be a real albatross, this connection with civics and current politics.
I really wanted a wider release. I've forgotten exactly how many theaters it was released in. My sense is that it was about 7 theaters. It was done with a kind of, the idea was roadshow. I don't think we went wide for at least 3 months or more, maybe. It wasn't until after the first of the year. And by then, the fate had been decided.
But the film has become a classic. It's stayed around, and people still refer to it.
And I think it speaks to a generation that wasn't around.
People remember this film. It's stayed with them.
It's great because in the years since, it certainly stood the test of time. It's a major American film. It's been around for 20 years. It'll be around for another 20 at least. It's got resonance, it's well made. People still check it out.
It is now looked upon as one of the, wonderful films of the 80s.
Every day was exciting. Every day was a new challenge. And we met them. And it felt great to be part of that.
It was a really fun film to work on from the point of view of, the subject matter. But Phil also made it fun because he was a big believer in the story and in the whole idea of the film.
To be part of an iconic movie that has got a lot of soul and substance to it, you don't get those chances very often.
I mean, the movie was both on screen and off a great adventure.
When I think about the experience, I think about the relationships and the trust that was shared amongst us all.
It was a real sense of community, unlike anything I've ever experienced on a movie set. It was a 9-month shoot, and no one wanted it to be over. It was such a labor of love.
Status check, pressurization. Go. Water systems. Go. Mercury capsule. Go. All pre-stockpile lights are correct. The ready light is on. On my mark, we will pick up the count at T-minus 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, ignition.
What absolutely fascinated me about Chuck Yeager and the astronauts was that they were all in a competition that the rest of the world didn't know about, and they were the embodiment of what was the right stuff. Each one of these people did have a different personality. Chuck Yeager is the most self-confident individual I ever met. Wally Schirra was a great jokester. Gordon Cooper was a great mystery to everybody else. He wins the self-confidence medal. And Scott Carpenter was another type entirely. Scott was the astronaut who was most interested in being a visionary. He was much more of a dreamer.
When Tom Wolfe was researching his book, The Right Stuff, it was originally about the original 7 astronauts. And it had nothing to do with the Air Force or Air Force test pilots. But in doing research in the Mercury program, everything referred to Air Force test pilots who were getting killed, getting data to support the space program. When Tom did the research about the original 7 astronauts, he saw an interesting conflict. The Air Force had never been allowed to do research flying. It's that simple. We did, performance evaluation on fighters and develop weapon systems and things like this. And when the X-1 came out in the spring of '46, it was given to NASA. And Bell Aircraft Company built it, but the Air Force paid for it, and it was the Air Force's idea to develop a rocket airplane to fly above the speed of sound or at the speed of sound, because nothing had been above about 0.82 Mach ever. Phase 2 called to take it out to 1.1 Mach, and basically you went out about 2 or 3/10 of a Mach number each flight, looked at the data, and actually from the first flight that I made in the airplane to above Mach 1 was 93 days. Bell had built a flying tail on the airplane with the jack screw and nitrogen air motors, and it let it accelerate out to about 1.07 or 1.08 Mach. The big thing that came out of the whole X-1 program was that we found out if you're going to operate in the region of speed of sound or supersonic speed, man, you got to have a flying tail. The X-1 was classified. The rest of the world had no idea. Yeah, a year later they released we'd go on Mach 1, but never how. It took the British and the French and the Soviet Union 5 years to find out that little trick. See, that opened up the universe to us.
The job of test piloting involves flying any machine that comes along that flies higher and faster. And here was a chance to fly a machine that made a quantum leap in altitude and speed.
I think it really was the president, Eisenhower, who really suggested that what they really ought to do is look towards experienced test pilots.
The test pilots in the cadre amounted to 550. These were graduates of the Navy School in Patuxent, the Air Force School at Edwards, and the Empire Test School in Great Britain. Of those 550, only 110 had the required college degree. Chuck Yeager, for instance, didn't have a college degree. He accepted that with understanding and patience, but he would have made a great spaceman.
They had to have jet experience. I think it was 1,000 jet hours. Had to be less than 40 years old, and I think about 5'10", maybe 5'11" max. And those variables, of course, eliminated a lot of other people.
We were all ordered to Washington, briefed on what it was all about, and asked if we wanted to volunteer.
Well, then at Albuquerque, they eliminated a hell of a lot more with their physicals and their mental tests. They probed every hole they could find, and as John Glenn said, they found more holes than we thought we had, and they probed every one of them. Well, we lived through that, not knowing what they were trying to do. They were trying to get a baseline, a background, a physical background, and a mental background of a person who would go into space that they couldn't really monitor completely while they're in space.
And after 3 fascinating testing sessions, 7 were chosen. We met early April in '59. We recognized something monumental was happening. But you come together with a crew like that, and you start off with a great respect for everybody in the group.
The 7 of us really didn't know each other at all until that unbelievable press conference in April of 1959. I'd say that initial press conference was something we had no experience with whatsoever. Here we were major, lieutenant commander, a couple of Air Force captains.
Each one of us, I think, was a little wide-eyed at what was going on, and I'm sure each one of us tried to give better answers than anybody else did. There was constant competition.
A lot of our friends who we knew before said, "Why are these guys on the cover of Life? They haven't done a damn thing yet." And I'm sure you've heard stories like that from guys like Chuck Yeager.
You had 7 original astronauts who had done nothing. You had, professional PRs, guys that blew them out of shape. And you had Air Force guys who had no publicity at all, and many of them killing themselves.
There were many misconceptions that were fostered by the press who didn't quite understand. Best example of that is Shepard's naming of his capsule, Freedom 7. Freedom pleased everybody because that's what we are, a free nation. A newspaper in Cocoa Beach printed the story of the naming and said, "Isn't that nice of Al to name his capsule Freedom 7? Freedom is good for this country, and 7 he'd used to honor the 7 Mercury astronauts." It was really named Freedom 7 because that was the 7th capsule off the line. It was number 7. But that misconception was created, and so everybody who came along afterward had to name his capsule something 7. Gus was Liberty Bell 7. John was Friendship 7. I was Aurora 7, and Aurora came from my belief that this is sort of a celestial event.
After working with these engineers, I began to realize no one has ever given the engineers credit for these missions. I said, let's just make it sigma, meaning the sum of all engineering efforts.
Well, I figured I had a lot of faith in the people we were working with, and I had faith in all the hardware because we were following it very detailed, very closely, and had a lot of input into the hardware. I had faith in all the launch team and people I was working with. I had faith in myself, and I had faith in God. I named it Phase 7.
What we had to prove in Mercury was that man could go into space, do some reasonably complicated tasks, maneuver the vehicle, take it over, and bring it back home safely.
First of all, the interesting thing was nobody knew how to train an astronaut, including us. So we had to devise a training program at the same time we were training. We went to UDT school to get underwater training because we felt that maybe somewhere along the line underwater might simulate zero gravity somewhat. And it turned out we were exactly right on that. Plus the fact we needed to know how to get along in water because we were going to be landing in water, and Deke Slayton didn't even know how to swim.
We worked very closely with the engineers. They were buddies. They still are. That kind of loyalty was unbelievable. Well, that's what test pilots were trained to do, was work with those engineers and become team players. They called us immediately if they saw something they didn't like, and we would come together either by phone or go out and look at the product and say, we can't work with that. And it was that kind of input that took us through that beginning of the space program and made it work so well. Probably my first disappointment was when they made a selection for Shepard to have the first flight. Actually, they didn't name him at that point. They named Shepard, Grissom, and Glenn.
When Al was chosen, every one of us thought it was a terrible mistake because we were not chosen. Once the choice was made, we banded together behind Al.
All of us had been trained almost equally to that point in time. And only about the last month, they put Shepard into the high-speed training session. And Glenn was his backup. And Glenn was back up again for Grissom. And then Glenn somehow lucked out because we were supposed to have had a third suborbital flight, and they just said, let's go orbital. And John had that flight. Scott was given that second orbital flight, and I was his backup.
My mission was exactly like John's in duration, but I was given more freedom to control and to experiment and to do some science. John's flight was mainly an engineering flight, trying to evaluate the capsule and its systems. We moved on to the next flight, and I was interested in evaluating what was there before we got there rather than what got us there.
Well, my Mercury mission finally got off in October of 1962. We had to prove we could stay in orbit for 6 days. Then if we had a longer orbit, a longer mission, we could do a lot of experiments. But at that point in time, experiments were not as significant as making the spacecraft work well and perform well. And all of those things were my goal, and that's what that Sigma 7 kept me thinking about. Don't screw up this one. This has to be just right. I landed within about 3 miles of the carrier, and the carrier skipper, he was Captain Rankin at that time, and I discussed this, and I said, you know, but for your ship being 3 miles out of position, that was a pretty good recovery. And we kidded about that for years ever after. But it was really fun to come down and land where I was supposed to land within sight of the carrier. Everything worked perfectly.
So I knew probably a year before that I was going to have the Mercury 9. We had to prove that, first of all, I could totally power the spacecraft down and go for long periods of drifting flight, and prove that I'd use as little fuel as we thought we would, and we did even better than we thought. Oxygen was the big surprise because I was the first non-smoker to fly, and based on the consumption of the guys who had flown before, I used 1/3 of the oxygen they'd planned on me using, which pretty good testimonial for clean lungs.
If you look at the movie, 3 hours and 13 minutes long, if you look at the Air Force test pilots and people who worked in the Air Force, it was very, very accurate. And me as a technical advisor, I made sure it was.